Hi, I'm Fiona, Creative Director of Fiona Merrin Art. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to paint your 1970s dark brown kitchen backsplash tiles with the Rust-Oleum Tile Transformation Kit. I'll show you some major mistakes I made and how I fixed them on round 2. So let's get started. So here is the kitchen that we started with, nice mission brown tiles. And in round 1, we're going to fix the grout, clean the tiles, tape the room, and then paint it. Then, showing the mistakes, I'll then sand the room, sand all the tiles, wash the tiles, tape the room again, and paint it again to get the final finish. Here are the supplies you'll need. I'll put the list of supplies in the notes to this episode. However, the awesome paint scraper tool I would highly recommend. I use this tool on almost every project. I use it to open and close paint tins, to scrape things down, all sorts of things. It is super handy. So here I need to remove this old grout. So you can see I'm using my paint scraper tool. This actually was the most effective tool, but I will show you a couple of different tools like this one. So we have the paint scraper tool that could get into really tight spaces. And then we have this sort of grout scraper tool from the hardware store, but I kept going back to the paint scraper. Using the grout brush, you can brush out all of that dust and extra grout that you get out. And then I won't show you any instructions on grouting because I'm not great at it, but basically you squeeze the grout in and then use your finger to apply it. I think preparing your walls and your tiles is absolutely the most important, and I knew this as a painter, so I used the product they supplied, plus I used other products such as sugar soap, and I washed and cleaned the walls all the tiles in both directions, trying to get in between all of the grout lines, and every single tile I scrubbed a minimum of twice. I'd already finished it by the time I remembered the video, so I'm just coming back here to show you that I went both ways. I used to use a lot of water and made sure I use lint-free cloths to wipe it all down clean and ready to paint. To get prepared to paint, I have put butcher's paper down with lots of painter's tape. The packet says you need 2 people, 1 to brush, 1 to roll, but I will be doing this on my own, so I've taken extra care to make sure that all of the paint where I don't want the paint to go has been taped up. This little window jamb, I put a brush underneath it to lift that lock up so that I didn't have to stop and fiddle around with the window while I was painting. You can see those lovely black tiles there. I'm not sure who decided to put those. Must have been an earlier reno, maybe in the 80s. I also put some plastic down on the ground and make sure you wear your socks so you don't slip. All right, here we go. Let's start mixing some paint. With the rooms prepared, we've got the 2 parts from the Rust-Oleum kit. Got my handy paint scraper. I've also got the foam brushes, which the pack recommends that you buy, apparently to fix up the errors at the end. The roller, which they provide only the sponge bit. You have to buy the roller thing. I've got a paint tray here with a couple of liners. Because I'll be painting this on my own, and again, the pack does say have 1 person brushing, 1 person rolling, so I've got 2 liners out there, so I can sort of the plan is to put the roller in one and the brush in the other, but we'll see how that pans out. Now, using my handy paint scraper, we'll get on to opening up the tin and starting mixing this paint. I've sped this up nice and fast because this took about 5 minutes, 5 to 8 minutes, I think, of stirring and stirring. What I did realise is it was coming out really slowly, but the second time around, I'd forgot to take out the plastic plug inside. It really does pour out a lot better if you open it up properly. Now we're ready to paint. So as per the instructions on the packet, I used brush to brush the edges, both the side and the top and the bottom edges. And I started to notice really early on that you really needed to push that brush in. It's very thick paint, but it seemed to be applying well and staying where it was meant to be. The packet says go up and down and then left and right, and so vertical then horizontally. And when I started using the roller, I noticed that the paint wasn't going in to paint that grout white, and because the grout's really old, the grout was all different colours, and I really wanted to have that sparkling white look at the end, so I really tried to get that brush into all the little gaps. And as you'll see, as we keep painting here for another 30 seconds or so on a bit of high speed, you'll see that I kept having to use the brush to go in the middle. Then I started thinking, well, maybe I should just paint the grout first with the brush and then go over with the roller, which I started to do, and that seemed to be working well. And so far so good, and we just kept on painting. I kept on painting. So yeah, you don't need two people, you can do it with one. Just have the brush and the roller, and away you go. So we kept on painting. You can see I'm getting in between those grout lines and then painting vertically with short strokes and then horizontally. Okay, so we've gone right around the kitchen. I've painted the windowsills and all the walls. This is the very last section. And what's been happening is that even though I had washed the walls down really, really well and scrubbed them as I showed you earlier, the little bits of grout had been coming out of the wall and had been implanting themselves inside of that roller brush. And as I was brushing, not only was the lint from the brush coming off onto the paint, but the grout was pretty much repositioning itself on almost every single tile. Now, while I didn't realise this on the very first wall, by the time I'd got to this last wall, I had tried to clean the brush out using my paint scraper tool. I didn't have any other spare rollers to use. And so I looked at this roller. It was a 5 or a 6 snap roller that included with the roller brush that included with the pack. So I had figured that this would be the perfect product. But it had started to absolutely disintegrate by the time, and you can see here I'm trying to pick not only just lint off the wall, but I'm trying to pick these tiny little bits of grout. So maybe I'll follow the instructions again and use the foam brush, which they recommended you buy, and then use a little bit of paint and pat it onto the problem areas to try and resolve it. So I use a foam brush, I get a little bit of paint, and in the areas where the paint hadn't applied itself well into the tile, so in between the grout or in certain areas, it did appear like it had vaguely fixed the problem in certain places. But as you can see in the top right of this video, you see those little dots? That's tiny little bits of grout which had decided to move from one location of the wall to another. So I kept going around with the foam brush trying to get rid of these little bits of grout and look for lint. I resorted to getting tweezers, and then I started to try and pick these little bits of grout off every single tile. Now, I spent, the paint dries in 90 minutes. By this stage, I'd been working for just over an hour, so the paint was vaguely wet, but in some areas it definitely dried, and so it was starting to get a little bit difficult. And with the tweezers, I started to scratch the paint a bit, so then I'd have to go back over it with a foam brush, and I didn't want to put the roller back on the wall because then more grout will come out of the roller, because you can't even see the grout. It was hiding in between these little hairs. I think it was, I'm not sure if it was microfiber or if it was mohair brush, but either way, it wasn't good. And so I just kept on trying to get all these little bits off the wall. And maybe it was the age of the wall. Maybe I should have scrubbed it 3 or 5 times. But as you can see, these little bits were everywhere. Now, when I let these walls dry over 2 days, literally every single tile, except for one, which was my perfect tile, had little bits of grout or lint on it, mainly grout. And so it was very disappointing within a couple of days. There was also paint sagging in at least 5 or 6 places, which I didn't realise happened until a day or 2 later. So while the final paint job from round 1 looks okay from a distance, if you looked up close, it was terrible. And in the light the next day, I could see thousands of bits of grout, and I needed to fix it. So how do you solve sagging paint and little bits of grout all over your tiles? Well, firstly, I use my trusty Ryobi sander with battery pack, and I use 180 grit and 80 grit sanding pads. I needed to use the 80 grit to really cut back that grout, those little bits of grout everywhere, and also wherever the paint was sagging, I really used the point of that and the side of that sander to dig into it so that I could really get down and get that flattened back to the tiles. In many cases, you'll see that there are patches on the wall where I've sanded back to the tiles. What you can't see here is the thousands of bits of grout that I had to sand back. And you remember I did say that I had one perfect tile from the first round of painting, and we should have a little look at that because it is beautiful. And there it is right there, beautiful. So this time around, I was not going to let any loose grout impact the outcome. So I really spent some time saturating those walls with water and rubbing them down multiple times. So we're ready to paint again, and this is the big difference. This time I bought these Micro-Fibre 4 nap super smooth gloss finish roller brushes, especially made for Aqua-Enamel gloss, satin and varnish. The Unipros, and I bought 10, so if one brush got little bits of grout, I would swap them out. I also bought extra trays so that I could use more trays and more brushes and not transfer grout from one location to another. So we got mixing and then we started. So here we go, round 2 painting. Following the same process to begin with, but there'll be a big change happening in a minute. I've used the brush to brush the edges, the top, the bottom, the sides, and also use that brush to get into between those little grout lines. I then use the roller, following the instructions for now, to roll up and down. The difference being I'm using these new microfiber rolling brushes, and I will use 8 of those brushes, the rollers, throughout the course of this particular second round of painting. So here's the big difference. Once I've done the first section here of both brushing and rolling both ways, I'm going to change the roller. I'm going to take off this wet roller. In just a second, here we are. We're going to take that wet one off, put it in a tray, and we're going to get a brand new dry roller and pop it on our roller. Now the dry roller is great because it's going to not only fix any imperfections, it's going to pick up any extra paint. It was great to see that it was pushing the paint into the grout lines a little better and really smoothing off that paint to give it the perfect finish. Now the perfect finish, it turns out, for this particular paint is like a stone. So you will see tiny little specks all over it, but that, as long as it was consistent all the way around the tiles, it will end up looking great. So it didn't really matter which way. I was just going over, making sure that any places where the paint looked like it was too thick and it might sag a little bit, or there are any patches at all, I use that dry brush. Now I take the dry brush off, I put the wet one back on, and then I continued around the room. The other big difference here in this round of painting is that the second I saw a tiny bit of lint come off one of these brushes, I threw it out and started with a new one. So you see here, I'm using the wet brush to go up and down, and I've used the normal brush, to get in between the cracks, and then I'll use the dry brush to go over that section. And I did that all the way around the room, checking very carefully to make sure there wasn't a single bit of grout and there wasn't a single piece of paint anywhere that looked too thick. And here's the dry brush going on now. Dry brush, and now I'm going to dry brush that. And it worked really well. Now, when I had completed all of the tiles right around the room, I went over all of them with a brand new dry brush once again, just to ensure that there was going to be no sagging paints. I used a light, as you can see there in the corner, to really look at every angle of the tiles to make sure there wasn't any little bits of grout. And the only bits of grout that were there would have been the ones that I didn't find when I was sanding them. There might be one or two, but it is so much better than the thousands that were there before. As you can see, there's a nice smooth finish, none of the problems that I had earlier. A final check of the room revealed there were a few gaps between the tiles, which I was aware of because grout had fallen out a little bit when I'd been doing the sanding, and I decided to grout those after. But All in all, the results were fantastic. I'm really pleased. There is no more grout and there doesn't appear to be any sagging paint, and the next day proved to be the same. So here is the final room after the grout has been applied to the holes. You can see there are no gaps, there's no little bits of grout, there's no sagging paint. It looks fantastic. I'm very happy with the results. And as you can see, all of my tiles are perfect and not just one. In summary, would I do this project again? Absolutely. It looks so much better than those old brown 1970s tiles. My hot tips, if you're going to do this at home yourself, is to make sure you prepare your wall properly. Use the right roller brushes and ensure you dry brush after completing each section. Well, that brings me to the end of this lesson, but if you want to know more about me, you can go to my website at fionamerrin.com.au, where you'll find my real art, so you can see that not all my painting endeavours require this much fix-up. If you like what you've watched today and want me to create more content, please like and subscribe. Goodbye, and thanks for watching.